Now, it could take a while for South Africans to get more doses of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. The American Food and Drug Regulator has ordered that 60 million doses of the vaccine be destroyed. The doses were found to be contaminated at a plant in Baltimore in the United States. Now, South Africa has been waiting for clearance regarding the release of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. To discuss this further tonight, I'm joined by the Editor-in-Chief at Bhekisisa Health, Ms. Mia Malan. Good to be talking to you once again, Ms. Malan, but certainly not the type of news that we were hoping to receive. Take us back a little bit as to why it is that we find ourselves in a situation where the 2 million or so doses that are expected to be coming out of the Gqeberha plant might not actually see the light of day.
Yes, Tommy. So the situation is that we have vaccines, 2 million doses, as you've mentioned, that has already been manufactured, and they're waiting at a company called Aspen in South Africa that package them. They put them in vials and they package them. So in other words, they received the already made vaccine to package on this site. And the ingredients that were used in that vaccine were made at a company in Baltimore in the United States called Emergent Biosolutions. And in March, the U.S. Regulator, the Food and Drug Administration, investigated whether that company practiced good pharmaceutical practices, and they found one batch in March to be contaminated that then couldn't be used. And that led to the FDA deciding to investigate more batches and to put all the production on hold. And that is why we haven't been able to release our J&J vaccines, because the FDA wanted to investigate whether those batches were contaminated with the ingredients of another vaccine, AstraZeneca, that was produced in the same factory. And what they have found now is that 60 million of those doses have been contaminated. So the big question is, have our batches been affected? And if so, how many? So from what I understand, we know that some of our batches have certainly been affected, but we don't yet know exactly which ones, because the FDA has only released a statement and the health department has not yet received the full report. They're expecting it to receive it tonight, so we might know more over the weekend, but there is some indication that the additional batch of 480,000 of J&J vaccines that we will get in addition to our original order, the batch that is meant for teachers and for school staff, is unlikely to be affected. There's an indication that that batch will be okay. That's what we know for now about which batches and how many vaccines are affected. So we could hear that some of the batches we could still use, but we just don't know yet. But we do know that the FDA said there's 60 million doses that can't be used, but that there are 10 million that can be used, but they have to be used with a warning. So the FDA is going to say, here are vaccines, but we cannot guarantee that good pharmaceutical practices were exercised for those vaccines.
Two things that come out of what you've just said, Mia. First of all, do we know how big a batch is? We know that there are 2 million doses at the AstraZeneca site plant, but do we know how many vaccines there actually are, or doses there actually are in a batch?
I don't have an answer to that. All I do know is that our batches of J&J vaccines were going to be distributed in 3 batches in South Africa. I don't know if they import it that way, but our batches were going to be 1.1 million vaccines. In April, in mid-May, we were supposed to receive them, and then 2 more batches of 900,000 each. And the 2 million that we're talking about is the first 2 batches that we were going to receive. That is at Aspen.
Okay. So could there be a possibility, Mia, that some of these contaminated batches and doses have actually already been administered? Is that a possibility?
No, not in South Africa, because we haven't used any J&J vaccines, and the J&J vaccines that were used in the Sisonke study didn't come from these batches. Those were completely separate research vaccines that were collected from different research sites. So no, I don't think we have administered during the Sisonke study any contaminated doses. But the issue, of course, now is, what are we going to do? How will we cope with fewer vaccines, and how will the J&J vaccines affect the rest of the world? And in South Africa's case, we now have our Pfizer vaccines, but we only know the specific delivery dates of 2 batches. We know that on the 14th of June, we're going to get 600,000 100,000 more. And then on the 21st of June, we're going to get about 1.2 million. After that, we don't have specific delivery dates. The companies don't usually release them that far ahead of time. But we're now in a situation where there are many other countries who've also been affected for J&J. So there's going to be more pressure on Pfizer to distribute more vaccines to countries, which could affect the delivery dates, and it could potentially affect South Africa as well. It will also affect likely COVAX's access. They will also have Pfizer vaccines. So that might also have an effect. And also we know that the US government said they were going to share some of their vaccines. And the 3 vaccines that they were going to share is Pfizer, J&J, and AstraZeneca. And now they're going to have a problem with Pfizer, with J&J because of the FDA's decision. So we're looking at a tough situation ahead of us.
I mean, global supply is certainly going to be an issue here. The 10 million doses that the FDA says is going to allow to be distributed, albeit with a disclaimer. Do we know where those 10 million doses are going to be distributed?
We don't know. All the FDA said it can either be distributed in the US or to other countries, but there's no announcement as to whether it would indeed be distributed to the US and to which countries. We do know in South Africa that our health department has been looking at other options of vaccines. They've definitely been looking into Sinovac, which has been approved also as a good vaccine by the World Health Organization on an emergency list. And they're also looking at Sputnik, and I understand at Moderna, but we know that they cannot procure any vaccines that have not been approved by our regulator, SAPRA, and we have not had any announcements in this regard. I know that they have announced that Sinovac and Sputnik have certainly applied for approval with SAPRA. They have not made any announcement about Moderna. The last we heard about Moderna was that the company didn't really see South Africa as a market for their vaccine, but possibly there could have been more talks after that announcement. We just don't know.
So backtracking to the situation that we find ourselves in now with the FDA's latest announcement, how does that impact South Africa's rollout of the vaccinations?
Well, it essentially means that we're going to have to continue at the pace that we're currently rolling out, which is essentially at half the pace that we were planning to do. The health department has previously said that if we had our J&J vaccines, we could administer double the number of vaccines that we're administering at the moment. So it means we're going to roll out at a much slower pace than expected until we get more vaccines.
Well, Mia Malana, thank you very much for that update. But just before I let you go, is it a done deal? Is this open for negotiation? Has the FDA issued that directive for all of those doses to be destroyed, or is there still further investigation that still has to happen, specifically pertaining to the Gqeberha plant?
I would be very surprised if there could be negotiations, because this decision that the FDA has made is a safety decision. Certainly, we don't want to use vaccines that have been contaminated with a product of another vaccine, because not only might it not be effective, but it might be unsafe to use. And SAPRA, our regulator in this case, is relying on the FDA's decision. They call it a reliant mechanism, because the ingredients that were found, the doses that were found to be contaminated were produced under the jurisdiction of the FDA in America, and they cannot release products that are unsafe for the rest of the world to use. They could be sued, and bad things could happen to people. So if we want to make sure that we use safe and effective vaccines, then we're going to have to go by a decision of a very established regulator that have analyzed those products and found them not to be safe.
Mia Malana, thank you very much once again for your time and your insight in this regard. She is the editor-in-chief at Bhekisisa Health. Certainly seems to be a done deal. A total of 60 million doses of Johnson & Johnson will have to be discarded. And as far as South Africa is concerned, 2 million of those will be here or are here already at the Gqeberha plant.